Chapter 3. Aubrey finished copying the records 2 days later, around 9 o'clock in the morning, and sent a telegram to Mr. Althorp announcing the completion of his task. Rather than send a return telegram, Mr. Althorp himself arrived at the office at 3 the same afternoon. "Sir," was the best Aubrey could manage on such short notice. He gave silent thanks for Smith's failure to come to work that day, though Smith's empty desk made a glaring eyesore. Mr. Althorp didn't seem to notice. He directed his inquiring look at Aubrey alone. "Mr. Warren," he replied in a chipper tone. "May I come in?" "Of course, sir," said Aubrey, and stood to greet him. Mr. Althorp smiled and stepped over the threshold. Aubrey had the copies, 2 folios worth, ready on his desk before Mr. Althorp reached it. "Here you are, sir," said Aubrey, attempting to hand them over. "Splendid," said Mr. Althorp. He made no move to take the folios from Aubrey. "Could I ask another favour of you?" After a moment of hesitation, Aubrey set the folios back down on his desk. "Of course, sir," he said, careful not to let any bitterness seep into his words. He'd only stayed up half the night making copies Mr. Althorp apparently no longer wanted. "I'd like another tour of the factory," said Mr. Althorp. Aubrey limited himself to a single blink of confusion. "If you'll wait here, sir, I'll fetch Mr. Jennings." "Forgive me," said Mr. Althorp, holding out a hand to stay Aubrey's progress towards the door. "I'm afraid I've been unclear. I'd like you to direct the tour, if at all possible." Aubrey didn't raise his eyebrows at his new employer, no matter how much he wished to. "If you found Mr. Jennings's tour insufficient, I fear mine wouldn't suit much better. His knowledge of the mill is unparalleled. A tour directed by myself would be far less informative." "Perhaps," said Mr. Althorp. "But in my experience, the more knowledgeable the speaker, the drier the speech. Thus, in the presence of unparalleled knowledge, one finds one's attention wandering, and one learns very little." Aubrey suspected Mr. Althorp's attention would wander if a stray dust mote floated into his peripheral vision. "Correct me if I mistake your meaning, sir. You believe my ignorance will prove advantageous to your purpose?" "Yes," said Mr. Althorp with a triumphant grin. It quickly faded. "I mean, that is to say, not ignorance, precisely." Aubrey withheld a grin of his own. Doing so was only moderately more difficult than trying to ignore how Mr. Althorp stammered and blushed when flustered. The scarlet flush clashed with the gold of his hair, and oughtn't have looked as becoming as it did. Mr. Althorp took no notice of Aubrey's struggle. "Merely an understanding of how one who is not already possessed of all the facts might approach new information, as it relates to manufacturing. To use the common phrase, you can put it into layman's terms." Aubrey choked back a snort of disbelief at the thought of Mr. Althorp considering himself a layman. "Are you ill, Mr. Warren?" said Mr. Althorp. His gentle tone, combined with the knitting of his brows, would, in any other person, represent grave concern. In a man of Mr. Althorp's position, such an emotion was impossible, particularly towards a mere assistant clerk. "Not at all, sir," said Aubrey. "If you were still interested in a tour—" "Yes," said Mr. Althorp with more enthusiasm than the situation warranted. "If you have the time for it." "You are the full owner of the mill, sir," said Aubrey. "My time is your object. Still, I should hate to infringe upon your hospitality, or impede your work in any way." "And yet here you remain," thought Aubrey, though the sentiment lacked its typical bite. If nothing else, touring the mill with Mr. Althorp would be a refreshing respite from yet another afternoon spent toiling in darkness. The latter reasoning silenced the guilty little voice in the back of Aubrey's head that demanded maximum efficiency. "No imposition at all, sir," said Aubrey. "If you'll just let me notify Mr. Jennings of my absence, we may begin our tour directly." "Delightful," said Mr. Althorp, and sounded as if he meant it. As Lindsey followed Mr. Warren across the yard to the mill, it seemed as if he walked not upon the vibrating cobblestones, but on a cloud of bliss. This cloud began to dissipate as they reached the mill, and vanished entirely when Mr. Warren opened the doors and the deafening roar of industry returned in full force. In his eagerness to secure a tour from Mr. Warren, Lindsey forgot the reason Mr. Jennings's tour proved insufficient. Now it was too late to deter Mr. Warren from gesturing at various industrial processes and giving detailed verbal instruction, all of it drowned out by the cacophony around them. Lindsey, regretting the lost opportunity to hear Mr. Warren's voice, yet happy for the chance to gaze upon his face, nodded along regardless of what Mr. Warren was saying. This strategy worked until a nod from Lindsey produced a queer look from Mr. Warren. Mr. Warren repeated himself, his bow-shaped lips moving with slow precision. Despite this, the factory's rumblings swallowed up his words. Lindsey, having already failed with a nod, tried shaking his head. Mr. Warren's queer expression deepened into a full-on frown of confusion. A handsome frown, but a frown Lindsey was loath to have caused. The game was up. "I can't hear you," said Lindsey, with no proof in his own ears of whether or not he'd made any sound at all. Mr. Warren's frown disappeared. He brought out a notebook and pencil from his jacket pocket, scribbled in it, then held up the result for Lindsey to read. In clear, precise script were the words, "Will this do?" Lindsey laughed. "Yes, quite." The corners of Mr. Warren's mouth twitched. He wrote more, then handed the notebook over to Lindsey. "Carding room. Straightens cotton fibre and removes impurities." Lindsey looked up to find Mr. Warren pointing at a particular section of the apparently endless machine. Men fed great bundles of cotton into huge cylinders of wire teeth, which devoured it, tearing it to pieces and remoulding it into a cleaner, more orderly shape. The cotton tossed from one cylinder to the next, growing brighter and finer at each stage. Then the whole mess fell onto a conveyor belt. Lindsey watched in quiet fascination until Mr. Warren tapped him on the shoulder, a touch Lindsey savoured, and indicated they should move on. They followed the carded cotton into the spinning room, where Mr. Warren's notes told Lindsey of the self-acting mule. It hunched on the floor like an enormous steel spider. 2 men tended it. As Lindsey watched, the front of the mule lurched forward. Wheels ran along a track in the floor, presenting a long bar at waist height with 100 bobbins stuck on in a row, trailing threads behind. With a clatter and a whir, the bobbins spun and grew thick with thread. Then, quick as they'd started, they stopped. The mule folded back in on itself, and the men sprang into action. The first scooped up the full bobbins and carried them off in a handcart. The second swooped in after him to refill the rack with empty bobbins. With a decisive thunk, the machine jerked into motion again. Boys, younger than Lindsey had been when his father sent him to Eton, ran under the mule between revolutions, ducking clacking beams to fiddle with the suspended strings. According to Mr. Warren's notes, the men were mule spinners, and the boys were piercers, repairing broken threads. The bobbins went next to the weave room. Lindsey and Mr. Warren went with them. Here worked the dozens of young women Lindsey recalled from his initial tour. They continued to ignore him, intent on their task as Mr. Warren explained it. His notes, full of looms and warps and wefts, brought to life all the diagrams and illustrations Lindsey had studied the night before. More importantly, Mr. Warren's face came alive too. Throughout their tour, a smile threatened to overtake his bow-shaped lips, and his dark eyes shone bright as he expounded on the industrial processes. Lindsey found it most distracting, and as a result, failed to memorize some of the knowledge Mr. Warren endeavoured to impart. It didn't trouble Lindsey overmuch. If worse came to worst, he'd simply request a third tour of the mill. Mr. Warren drew Lindsey's attention up to the rafters, where a thick leather belt wrapped around a spinning shaft, connecting it to the loom on the floor. Lindsey turned back to Mr. Warren with a quizzical expression. Mr. Warren scribbled in his notebook. Power transferred from engine to shaft to belt to loom. "And where is the engine?" shouted Lindsey. Mr. Warren motioned for Lindsey to follow him back to the stair. Mr. Althorp followed Aubrey out of the mill like an amicable shadow. They circled the building to the engine house at the back. Aubrey introduced Mr. Althorp to the two men on duty. Mr. Cartwright, chief engineer, a heavy-set fellow in his 50s, with a grey broom-bristle moustache, and Mr. Hepworth, second engineer, of a narrower build, with 30-odd years under his belt. Mr. Althorp peppered them both with questions. Aubrey bit his tongue to keep from answering them in Mr. Cartwright's place. They were more intelligent questions than Aubrey would have expected from a toff of Mr. Althorp's calibre, along the lines of, "At what pressure does the boiler run?" rather than, "What is an engine?" And Mr. Cartwright responded with his customary dry yet respectful tone. Still, Mr. Cartwright had a thankful nod to spare for Aubrey when Aubrey gently steered Mr. Althorp away towards the mill yard. They walked side by side, Aubrey taking a step and a half for every one of Mr. Althorp's strides. Mr. Althorp looked up at the rooftops of the mill complex. Aubrey looked at Mr. Althorp. Weak sunlight filtered down through the clouds of Manchester. Each pathetic ray caught and bloomed brilliant in the blonde waves escaping from under Mr. Althorp's top hat. Aubrey felt some guilt. He wasn't paid to admire handsome gentlemen on the sly, but the sight captivated him nonetheless. If he were caught, he supposed he could pass off his behaviour as the natural, awestruck gaze a posh twit would expect the lower classes to bestow upon the gentry. "I've been reading up on textile manufacture," said Mr. Althorp, startling Aubrey out of his reverie. "I've come across a curious item. I wonder, if it isn't too much trouble, could you tell me more about jacquard looms?" Aubrey stumbled to a halt. "Jacquard looms?" he echoed, giving Mr. Althorp a very unprofessional look of surprise. "If it wouldn't be too much trouble," Mr. Althorp reiterated. Aubrey tried to stop gawking at him. "No trouble at all, sir. But I'm afraid the explanation is rather dull. I should hate to bore you." Mr. Althorp put on a grave expression, though his eyes continued to gleam with a suppressed smile. "I take full responsibility for my own potential boredom." "Very well." Aubrey cleared his throat. "Jacquard loom is something of a misnomer. The actual mechanism is a head which one may attach to almost any doddy loom. It uses a system of punched cards to—" "Please stop me if I grow tedious." "Not at all," said Mr. Althorp. "This is fascinating." From anyone else, Aubrey would have assumed the remark was sarcastic, but the look of rapt attention on Mr. Althorp's face suggested otherwise. Aubrey couldn't decide which reaction was more unnerving. He swallowed his discomfort and spoke on. "As I said, the punch card system enables the creation of much more complex patterns. Each card is fitted over the hooks of— One moment. We require a diagram." He took out his notebook and pencil, cast about for a flat surface, found the brick wall of the offices, and ran over to them. Only then did he realise how deranged he must appear to Mr. Althorp's eyes. Yet Mr. Althorp didn't question his behaviour. He followed Aubrey to the wall and peered over his shoulder at the blank page. The faint heat radiating from Mr. Althorp's chest, like a thrumming engine, washed over Aubrey's back as if his wool jacket were made of cobwebs. The warmth drove all thought of engineering from Aubrey's brain for several terrifying moments. He hadn't stood so close to another man, to another person, for more years than he cared to count. A weak and reprehensible part of him yearned to lean back. His rational mind reminded him that he had a job to keep and a reputation to uphold. He forced himself to think upon the latter, found strength enough to steady his pencil, and began to draw. It wasn't the best diagram Aubrey had ever produced. The texture of the bricks beneath his notebook gave his line work a bit of a wobble, and his pencil moved at speed to keep up with his words. Still, when he finished his explanation and looked back over his shoulder, Mr. Althorp nodded in understanding. "Fascinating," he said again. "Might I keep that?" Aubrey, caught in the midst of closing his notebook, paused. His left eyebrow shot up before he could stop it. "The drawing, I mean," Mr. Althorp added. "If it wouldn't be—" "No trouble at all, sir," Aubrey finished for him. He tore out the page, careful to keep a straight edge to the paper. "If you'd like a more accurate diagram, an encyclopedia might—" As he held out the page to Mr. Althorp, he trailed off, a thought having just occurred to him. An encyclopedia would not only contain a more accurate diagram, but also a full and complete explanation of the Jacquard loom. In fact, Aubrey couldn't think of any source but an encyclopedia from which Mr. Althorp could have learned of the Jacquard loom's existence in the first place, which made his desire for an explanation from Aubrey equal parts superfluous and unfathomable. Mr. Althorp took the drawing with a benign smile and folded it up to fit in his waistcoat pocket. "Thank you. You said something earlier about punched cards outside the textile industry?" "Yes," Aubrey replied with a bit too much vigour. "That is to say, Charles Babbage intended to integrate them into his analytical engine. He never managed it, of course. But just 2 years past, Herman Hollerith used punch cards to sort through census data. In Aubrey's experience, most people stopped listening by this point, if not long before. He knew he ought to keep his passions restrained, particularly when speaking to his employer. However, Mr. Althorp gave no sign of impatience. On the contrary, his eyes widened as Aubrey detailed the latest advances in mathematics and the sciences. "Extraordinary," said Mr. Althorp when Aubrey finished. "Most extraordinary indeed. Mr. Warren, you're wasted as a clerk. You ought to be an engineer." The cautious smile blooming on Aubrey's lips died at that remark. "I'm quite happy in my position, sir." He meant to sound more grateful, but there it was. Any fool would be happy to be clerking rather than labouring or starving, or on his knees before men of Mr. Althorp's station. His frustrated aspirations didn't matter. Aubrey was lucky enough to have escaped the poverty of his youth. To expect more would be folly. Mr. Althorp frowned in confusion, but said nothing beyond, "Of course." Aubrey forced a smile in return.